Stand up.
Hello. Yeah, I am so excited to have you joining me for today's episode of Stand Up. I've got a great first-time guest joining me today, New York Times best-selling author, writer, and journalist, the author of 15 books, more than 400 articles. This woman has spent a lifetime researching and writing about the importance of relationships. She's brilliant, she's hilarious, and she's 80 years old and proud of it. You are going to love my conversation with Melinda Blau. It's something different, it's something inspiring, and I feel like it's something that affected me in a very positive way in how I think about my life, how I live it, and think about aging as well, and the importance of relationships with all different kinds of people in your lives. That conversation begins at 35 minutes. But of course, I've got your headlines, and I've collected all the best sound clips I could. I've got some great ones for you from the weekend. Lots to get to. First, I do want to mention tomorrow night I'll be hosting a hangout, a watch party, really. More of a watch party than a hangout. We had almost 80 people for the last debate. I'm talking about the first and probably only vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and the great Tim Walz. Looking forward to that, and I hope that you'll join me. If you're a subscriber, you'll get an email with a link to the Zoom, and we will watch it and live through it together as members of our amazing community that is growing. Welcome to new subscribers. So happy to have you. And I want to announce that we are in talks with the always awesome, amazing, kind, generous, thoughtful, and righteous Cassie Rice out in Las Vegas. Last year, we did the first ever stand-up gathering. We called it Pod Jam. We did it in March. It was really wonderful, but we're excited to improve upon it. Save the date, March 30th. We're going to do our best to make it happen again. We'll have an official announcement, hopefully in a couple weeks. And if you'd like to join the planning meetings, I'll talk about that at this week's Hangout as well. So be there at the Hangout to talk about it and discuss it and what we're going to do better and different and make it so much better. And it was already pretty magical last year. But I hope to have a whole bunch of our favorite guests joining us this year, like Eric Siegel, Aaron Carroll, and so many more. Who would you love to meet and hear from, have sit down with me and do a little Q&A with that's a regular on the show, or even if they're not? Who should we invite? I'd love to hear from you. And so I'm looking forward to that and talking with you about it. See you this Thursday at the Hangout and tomorrow night at the Watch Party. Also, I'll be debating Fox News comedian Jimmy Fallon at the Comedy Cellar in New York City, October 8th for Open for Debate organization, formerly Intelligence Squared. Unfortunately, my friend John Donvan is not moderating, but October 8th, I'll be at the Comedy Cellar debating Jimmy Fallon about basically Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, who's better, on a few obviously key issues. So I think that's all I wanted to tell you before I got to headlines and clips. So let's do that now, because, man, the big headline over the weekend obviously was Hurricane Helene, how it affected stand-up community members. We've checked in with our friend France Pants. Francis is okay, but it's really devastating where she is. She's been without electricity there in Asheville. And the rest of you in North Carolina and the other affected states, we really want to hear from you. But the way it's being written about and reported by journalists who are on the ground and talking to folks who are victims is like this. Hurricane Helene has left biblical devastation in parts of North Carolina, officials say, after it tore across 5 southeastern U.S. states and left at least 84 people dead. Over 1,000 are still unaccounted for. In one report I read, the storm surge, wind damage, and inland flooding from Hurricane Helene have been catastrophic, flooding neighborhoods, stranding residents, destroying homes, and toppling trees in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. Helene, which made landfall in Florida's Big Bend region Thursday night as a massive Category 4 hurricane, was the strongest hurricane to make landfall in the Big Bend on record, and a clear image of the destruction and hard-hit North Carolina especially emerging yesterday, where after barreling through Florida and Georgia, Helene brought torrential rain in swamp towns with flooding and mudslides. More than 400 roads are closed in the state. Homes have been destroyed. Towns have been cut off. Water systems down. Hundreds of thousands without power. The storm has brought, quote, catastrophic devastation of historic proportions, according to the governor, Democrat Roy Cooper. But you know what? I'm sure if the governor were Mark Robinson, the black Nazi, things would be a lot more prepared and organized and taken care of in the post-storm cleanup and search and rescue. So vote for that guy. Or, of course, vote for Democrat Josh Stein, who is the guy anyone on Earth One would want to support, the current Attorney General of North Carolina. vote Josh Stein in North Carolina. And our hearts go out to all of you who are dealing with this. It sounds absolutely horrific. And obviously, we'll learn more in the days and weeks to come. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help, if anybody needs a place to stay or supplies or anything in this or future storms. I like to think that's part of what our community is here for. So let us know how we can help each other all the time, because we're all over the place supporting each other as much as we can. And it's nice to have that community and support when things like this happen. Speaking of awful things, over the weekend, crazy news coming out of the Middle East. The leader of the Lebanon-based militant group Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, was killed in an Israeli airstrike on his underground headquarters in Beirut. This was on Friday. Both Israel and Hezbollah have confirmed. This guy led the group for more than 30 years. He was a hugely influential figure in the region, and he died when Israeli fighter jets struck an area of the capital's southern suburbs known as Dahive. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the killing of Nasrallah marks a significant escalation, according to everybody that I've read, in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. It's intensified, obviously, in recent weeks, prompting fears it could spill over into a regional war. At least 105 people were killed, 359 injured in Israeli airstrikes across Lebanon yesterday, according to the country's health ministry. The bombardment has destroyed homes and civilian infrastructure, displacing tens of thousands. And I think about this happening in Ukraine and happening in Lebanon and Gaza, these airstrikes and these missiles raining on Israelis as well, these rockets over the years, and just can't imagine what it must be like to live under that threat that planes and rockets could rain down on your homes and your streets. It's just hard for most of us, I think, to fathom. Israel's assassination of the leader has further inflamed tensions in the Middle East, intensified the war at the border with Lebanon. The Iran-backed militant group says it will continue to fight, even as a growing number of senior Hezbollah figures have been killed. U.S. officials are still pressing for a ceasefire, seeing the possibility of limited Israeli ground incursion into Lebanon, but stress that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu does not appear to have made a decision yet. Hezbollah, meanwhile, continues to fire rockets into northern Israel, where one of Netanyahu's war aims is to return residents who have been forced from their homes by recent fighting. All right, that is the update on the hurricane and the Middle East. Let's stay with the international news headlines for just another minute. In Austria, the far-right Freedom Party, founded by former SS Nazis in the 1950s, won a close election, a result that could reshape Europe's political landscape and help tilt the balance of power between Russia and the West. Represents a stunning reversal of fortunes for the party, which crashed out of government in 2019 after a corruption scandal, but has fallen far short of an absolute majority in the tight election, and it will need to help form a stable government. It's going to be hard for them to build a coalition. However, since all other major groups have ruled out working with them. Of course, in other elections in Europe this summer, they've seen the political extremes outperform their moderate counterparts. Austria may therefore face a period of political uncertainty as parties wrangle to take charge. Keep a close eye on what is happening there, obviously. Lots more to learn and say about Austria, but this, folks, is headlines. I don't go too deep. At least 104 people have died in Nepal after 3 days of monsoon rains caused flooding and landslides. And now let's go to South America, where the poverty rate in Argentina rose for the first 6 months of the presidency of Javier Milei's term in office, a reflection of his intense austerity program, according to the Associated Press. All right, let's come home to the U.S., talk about American politics and the presidential campaign. Kamala Harris now narrowly leads Donald Trump in Michigan and Wisconsin and is ahead in Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, according to a New York Times Siena College poll that was out yesterday. The polls point to a very close presidential election, even as Democratic Senate candidates in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Ohio are ahead. Over the weekend, or rather Friday, I believe it was, the disgraced former president met with Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, after Kamala Harris sat down with him. He looked grimly as Trump claimed that Vladimir Putin wanted the war in Ukraine to stop, and it was a real awkward thing. Did you see the video of that? I'm not going to play any of it, but for her part, Vice President Kamala Harris visited the southern border in Arizona Everybody said she had to go there, and then she went there, and then they criticized her for going there. But she pledged to continue President Biden's asylum restrictions, her campaign now saying that she supported even tougher limits than President Biden has put in place. Republicans now are filing lawsuits challenging voting rules ahead of Election Day. Experts say the effort could set the stage to contest the results should Donald Trump lose, which is most likely what will happen. And this headline, 6 people who were granted clemency by Donald Trump, the disgraced former president when he was president, have now been accused of another crime. Why aren't we seeing those ads? Maybe I'm just missing them. The Justice Department accused 3 members of Iranian cyber espionage unit of hacking the Trump campaign. Are we going to ever get to see those hacks? And the disgrace for New York Mayor Eric Adams, soon to be former, I'm guessing, pled not guilty to federal corruption charges in a Manhattan courtroom. Federal and state agents also seized his chief advisor's phone, and prosecutors pursuing corruption charges against Mayor Eric Adams appear to have solid evidence, according to all the experts that I'm reading and seeing. So that's another really important issue, obviously, to follow. I guess maybe not if you're not a New Yorker, but certainly I'm following it. Had some conversations, read some things about it over the weekend. SpaceX launched a mission to bring back the astronauts left at the International Space Station because of issues with Boeing's Starliner spacecraft. The 50th season of Saturday Night Live premiered this past weekend with the host Jean Smart, fresh off her Emmy win for Hacks. The musical guest was Jelly Roll. 3 new cast members, and Maya Rudolph returned as Kamala Harris. Jim Gaffigan made his debut as Tim Walz, and Dana Carvey was hilarious as the current President Joe Biden. I'll bring you some audio of all 3 of them coming up. And we lost 3 big-name actresses and artists. Maggie Smith died at the age of 89. She had an illustrious career, winning Oscars and Tonys, but maintained a relatively quiet life until Downton Abbey made her a mega star in her mid-70s. Of course, she was in the Harry Potter movies as well. Huge loss with the legendary Chris Christopherson, the actor and musician. He was 88 years old. And actor John Ashton passed away at the age of 76. You know him from Beverly Hills Cop and many other films. Those are your headlines. Now let's get to those sound clips that I've gathered for you. Every day, I try to find the most important headlines that impact you, your family, your country, your community, your planet, and I try to find the clips that are going most viral, getting the most attention, whether or not they deserve it, or that are impactful, making good points, or outrageous ones, or sometimes they're just funny and entertaining. I've got all of it for you in today's potpourri of news clips from the weekend. See? All right, let's start with Kamala Harris down there on the border, 2 minutes from the vice president, hopefully future next and first lady president ever.
And why last December I helped raise the rate of overtime pay for border agents, and also why I strongly supported the comprehensive border security bill. Written last year, as you know, by a bipartisan group of senators, including one of the most conservative members of the United States Congress. That bill would have hired 1,500 more border agents and officers. It would have paid for 100 inspection machines to detect fentanyl that is killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. It would have allowed us to more quickly and effectively remove those who come here illegally, and it would have increased the number of immigration judges and asylum officers. It was the strongest border security bill we have seen in decades. It was endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, and it should be in effect today, producing results in real time right now for our country. But Donald Trump tanked it. He picked up the phone and called some friends in Congress and said, stop the bill. Because, you see, he prefers to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And the American people deserve a president who cares more about border security than playing political games and their personal political future. And so even though Donald Trump tried to sabotage the border security bill, it is my pledge to you that as President of the United States, I will bring it back up and proudly sign it into law.
All right, there she was yesterday or over the weekend in Arizona, and former Arizona Senator, Republican Senator Jeff Flake was on TV and on social media out with his support for Kamala Harris. He has endorsed Kamala Harris for president, Tim Walz for vice president, and here he is yesterday on ABC's This Week with Martha Raddatz.
And you're joining the ranks of several Republicans endorsing Harris recently, notably Liz Cheney, Dick Cheney. Do you think it really makes a difference? Can you appeal to Republicans who may be on the fence?
Well, I think Republicans believe in the rule of law in particular, and it's difficult to support a candidate who, having lost an election, tries to use the powers of the presidency to overturn that election. That is anything but respect for the rule of law. So I know that a lot of conservative Republicans feel the way I do, that you just can't support a candidate like that. And with regard to tariffs as well, there are reasons to impose tariffs, but to pretend that we're going to get a windfall of money from some foreign government because we're imposing tariffs just doesn't jibe with what where conservatives have been on free trade.
All right, there you go. Jeff Flake, former Republican senator from Arizona, border state, supporting Kamala Harris. He also made a video in support of her. And now I've got to go to the disgraced former guy. I'm not playing sound, although I believe Martha Raddatz plays it in this clip, because he escalated his personal attacks on Kamala Harris Sunday, repeating an insult that she was, quote, mentally impaired, while also saying that she should be, quote, impeached and prosecuted. His rally in Erie, Pennsylvania took on similar themes as the one the day before, where he showed a cheering crowd that Kamala Harris was responsible for the invasion at the U.S.-Mexico border and that she should be impeached. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week had Tom Emmer, who is a Republican congressman, and disgraced himself on television when he tried to defend or get around these comments. Here it is.
Trump last night called Kamala Harris mentally disabled. He said that Joe Biden became that way. She was born that way. Do you think Kamala Harris is mentally disabled? Do you approve of that kind of language?
I think Kamala Harris is the wrong choice for America. I think Kamala Harris is actually as bad or worse as the administration that we've witnessed for the last 4 years, Martha. You got 20% inflation. You got the average family spending $1,200 more a month.
Congressman, do you approve of that language? Do you approve of that language? Donald Trump calling her mentally disabled, mentally impaired. So you don't approve of that. You don't.
I think we should stick to the issues. The issues are Donald Trump fixed it once. They broke it. He's going to fix it again.
Oh, what a flaming asshole that guy is for not being able to simply say that's disgusting and reprehensible. But, you know, got to pay fealty to the king to stay in power, I guess. And speaking of pilot fish and flaming assholes, here's Lindsey Graham on CNN with Jake Tapper being asked the same question and trying to get around it. And this is where you actually hear Trump saying it. Sorry about that. It's coming.
Trump campaign, because I want to play something Trump said yesterday in a speech ostensibly about Vice President Kamala Harris's visit to the border. Let's take a listen.
Kamala is mentally impaired. Joe Biden became mentally impaired. Kamala was born that way. If you think about it, only a mentally disabled person could have allowed this to happen to our country.
Okay, so first of all, there are actual people out there with mental impairments, right, and that's insulting to them. Second of all, Vice President Kamala Harris is not mentally impaired.
No, I just think she's crazy liberal. I don't question her.
But what do you think about that rhetoric?
I just think the better course to take is to prosecute the case that her policies are destroying the country. They're crazy liberal. 400,000 people have been let loose in our country. 16,000 people convicted of being a rapist. 13,000 convicted murderers, and 400,000 of people generally convicted of crimes released on her watch. It's not going to get better.
So I saw that statistic. We dove into it, our fact checker. That statistic is actually over decades. So some of those people you're talking about are people that came into the country during Trump. And second of all, Some of them are in prison. A lot of them are in prison, not ICE prisons, but federal prisons for their crimes. I can tell you this. The man who killed Laken Riley in Georgia was released by the Biden-Harris administration on parole because they had no capacity at the border to hold him. That's not a reason to parole people. I promise you, women have been raped and murdered. People have been hurt by illegal immigrants released into this country without detention. It is a nightmare. It is crazy. It's crazy to boycott a speech by the Prime Minister of Israel to a joint session of Congress thinking it won't embolden Iran. Well, it's crazy to withdraw from Afghanistan hoping things will be different this time. Medicare for all, Green New Deal, crazy stuff. Okay.
Now, I'm not saying she's crazy. I'm saying your policies are batshit crazy.
Okay, well, they're not my policies, and there's a whole lot of things you said. I'll just say she didn't boycott.
She didn't show up.
She didn't show up. But let's focus on Trump's.
That's the one you're pushing back on, Jake Tapper. Really, the boycotting of the speech. Could have done a little bit better there, my friend. But there is talk about batshit crazy. I mean, he is. But nobody's more batshit crazy than Roseanne Barr. This is kind of sad to hear, but she's sat down with Tucker Carlson. What's even sadder is the people in the audience that are cheering on in agreement with her. This took place, and Tucker Carlson, I guess he's doing like an arena tour. He goes and does interviews with people, but here he is. They were in Fort Worth, Texas. And I don't know what kind of people go to these Tucker Carlson events, but they were cheering her on as she said the most batshit crazy stuff in the world. So who really is crazy? Who really is living in reality and who is living in some paranoid fever dream conspiracy theory?
You know they eat babies. That is not bullshit. It's true.
So it's not just the dogs and the cats, not just the pets.
It's not just the dogs and the cats. They're full-on vampires. And everybody still thinks I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. They're full-on vampires. They love the taste of human flesh and they drink human blood. They do. By the time we go in to vote for Trump, that he will open up everybody's eyes and they will stop pretending to be asleep. You know what they say, you can't wake people up that are pretending to be asleep, but I pray to God, please wake up even those who are pretending to be asleep with the irrefutable truth of what the worst people on this planet are really up to. They are really up to that. They're doing it. There are so many victims.
All right, we have had just enough. I'm sorry about that. You might be upset with me for playing that clip. And if you are, definitely write me a letter, a hate mail. Please, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Dear Pete, you made my ears bleed on today's episode. Please don't ever play Roseanne Barr again. There, I wrote it for you. You've got my word. All right, let's go to something more sane. This is the former American military general in command of forces in Afghanistan. He was on CBS News with Robert Costa to endorse Kamala Harris, another leading military general endorsing Kamala Harris.
So many former military officials, top leaders who have served, men and women in uniform, have come out against former President Donald Trump. There are those, of course, like former retired General Keith Kellogg, who do support former President Trump, but high-profile people like yourself have raised concerns. I think about General Milley. General Milley had concerns in the final days of Trump's presidency about how he was handling his work, and you have concerns. You've endorsed Vice President Harris. It comes down to one core question here. General McChrystal, do you believe former President Donald Trump is fit for office?
I believe that Vice President Harris is fit to lead the country in the presidency.
Well, let's go right to the question of Trump. Is he fit for office or not? You're a former top leader of the United States military. You're supporting a presidential candidate. You have a former president now running for the presidency again. You seem to have core character questions. Is he fit for office or not?
Hey, Bob, let's be honest. Why would a retired military officer come on to endorse his opponent?
You tell me.
Because I think character is very important. And so I'm voting for character. I'm voting for Kamala Harris.
Well, there you have it. Stanley McChrystal's voting for Kamala Harris, retired United States Army general, best known for his command of the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC, during which his organization was credited with the killing of the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, and more, of course. All right, well, I loved this conversation with the second gentleman, Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff. I don't know him that well. I saw him at the DNC, and I haven't read that much about him. So I thought Jen Psaki asked great questions to him on MSNBC, which is why I'm bringing you 3 clips of Doug Emhoff. But I encourage you to watch the full interview. This guy seems very human, very authentic, self-effacing, and honest. Really, really honest. Here he is right now on MSNBC with Jen Psaki. This first clip is about her asking about the Republican nominee, Mark Robinson, the black Nazi, and anti-Semitism in America.
He also reportedly recommended Hitler's Mein Kampf as a good read. He called himself a black Nazi. He is still the nominee for the gubernatorial race here. Josh Stein is obviously a great candidate. What do you make of that as you look at the state of the Republican Party?
It's pure cowardice. It's shameful. It shouldn't be this way. We need a strong Republican Party. We need people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger who come out and endorse Kamala Harris, where you may not agree on every single idea and policy, but you agree on who we are as Americans. You agree on our Constitution and who leaders should be. So when you have someone who's made comments like Mark Robinson, he's clearly unfit, unhinged, should not be running, and the fact that Donald Trump was right here in Wilmington, right where I'm sitting, where he couldn't disavow Mark Robinson. He's trying to ignore it, but he did not disavow what Mark Robinson said, his candidacy, and it's just shameful. It's just shameful. And Donald Trump's the guy who said this guy's a star. He said he's Martin Luther King Jr. on steroids. Hasn't disavowed any of that. So Donald Trump is supporting Mark Robinson. Those are the types of candidates that he's supporting. And we can't have it. It just shows you yet another of the many, many examples of why Donald Trump is just unfit for any job, let alone President of the United States.
I also really like how he expanded on it here.
He also says women won't have to think about it if I'm elected, which...
Women meant we should be furious about this gaslighting, and furious, and turn this anger into action.
Yeah.
You've also been front and center in the fight against anti-Semitism, and your faith has long been important to you. You've talked about it quite publicly. And if the vice president is elected, you would be the first Jewish American to be a first partner, first gentleman, whatever you may call yourself. How does the history of that weigh on you in the moment?
Well, I take being the first Jewish White House principal ever. I take it very seriously. I take the responsibility. I'm accountable for it. And if you recall, even before October 7th, and really at Kamala's urging, we really leaned in on this fight against anti-Semitism on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration. And we put forth the first ever national strategy to counter anti-Semitism, which was released in May of 2023. So we had that out there, and then when the horrific day of October 7th happened, the administration was ready to take action. It's something that I've been working on, speaking about, meeting with released hostages, hostage families. It's intense, and a lot of times I don't want to do it. It's too raw. It's too emotional for me. And she is the one who keeps pushing me out there because of the responsibility that I have in this role, and because she cares about these issues. She is out there fighting these issues just like I am. What really bothered me a week or so ago is when Trump got up there at an event purporting to fight anti-Semitism, and he said vile anti-Semitic things, long, tropes that are just terrible. And, we have to speak out every single time when something like that happens. So I'm going to continue not to be afraid, not to be intimidated, not to live in fear, but to live openly and proudly as a Jewish person.
When you hear him say things like that, and he said that if he doesn't win, it will be essentially the fault of Jewish Americans.
Blame the Jews, one of the oldest tropes.
An old trope. I know you put a statement out on X at the time. Do you worry that he's putting a target on the backs of Jewish Americans?
He is. Take him at his word. He lies about a lot of things, but You've got to take him at his word on things like this. So, yeah, this is a disgusting trope, with this so-called dual loyalties. It's an outrage. And it's not just Jewish people that should be outraged.
Do you think he's anti-Semitic when he says things like that? Do you look at him and see the repetition of this type of words and language as anti-Semitic?
Of course it is. And I've said that publicly. Definitely.
Of course it is. He doesn't beat around the bush. I thought he was going to. For some reason, I thought he was going to hedge on that. Of course it is. Yeah, of course it is. And he said it publicly. That's great. It's really great. I love it. And I've got one more for you because I really like this interview.
There's also been an important part, or an interesting part of how people have talked about your role here is how your role has reshaped the perception of masculinity. And I'm not sure you planned on that, but you are an incredibly supportive spouse. Has that been an evolution for you? And do you think that's part of the role you might play as First Gentleman?
It's funny. I've started to think a lot about this. I've always been like this. My dad was like this. And to me, it's the right thing to do. Support women. It's mutual. Like with Kamala and I, we support each other. We have each other's back. And I've said many times when we lift up women, we support women, whether it's pay equity, child care, family leave, and all these issues that, this post-Dobbs hellscape, women should not be less than. Women should not have less rights and be treated differently. That's not the American way. And it's also not like if some woman succeeds, some dude out there is suffering. It's not a one-to-one relationship. When we lift up women, we lift up families, we lift up the economy. And when I was in the business world, it lifted up the organizations that I was in. It certainly lifted up the White House when you were there, with you there and Kamala as vice president. It was a great workplace there.
Yeah, I love it. I really like that guy. I shared that link to that on Facebook and Twitter. If you want to see the full interview, or just go to YouTube and Google Doug Emhoff on MSNBC with Jen Psaki. And now let's go to NBC. It's Saturday Night Live was back with its 50th anniversary. Maya Rudolph with a spot-on, dead-on impression of Kamala Harris in the cold opening. Take a listen to her.
Well, look who fell out of that coconut tree. Well, your fun aunt has returned. The fun has been rebooted. Too fun, too furious. I am so happy to be campaigning in whatever swing state I'm in, which I will just refer to as Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia. Because I am going to protect your Georgia. My campaign is like the Sabrina Carpenter song, Espresso. The lyrics are vague, but the vibe slaps. And sure, I like to laugh. I do. But let me tell you something. If you start talking nonsense to me, I'm going to hit you with one of these. Now, this election is about moving forward. You see, Donald Trump is stuck in the past. But it's like I say to my husband, Doug, when he leaves his phone at the Chili's. We are not going back.
Oh, my gosh, is she good? Oh, so good. Comedian Jim Gaffigan also came on and made a cameo. He played Tim Waltz, and he was also very good. Oh, I like Jim Gaffigan.
Folks, I haven't been this excited since I got a 10% rebate on a leaf blower from Menards. What can I say? I got that BDE, Big Dad Energy. See what I did there? You get it?
I got it. I didn't want it, but I got
it. Trump and Vance are weird, all right? And they want the government to control what you do in your bedroom and what books you read. In Minnesota, we have a saying, mind your damn business. We also have another saying in Minnesota, my nuts froze to the park bench. I got to be honest here, folks. When Kamala Harris called me and asked me to be her vice president, I said, yeah. This is personal for me. I love this country. And as a former teacher, I need the money. This suit is from Costco. It's a Kirkland brand. They make great dog food.
Oh, there you go. Gaffigan is Tim Walz. And last but certainly not least, the inspiration for why I got into comedy, one of my all-time favorites, Dana Carvey was back playing the current president, Joe Biden, and I thought this was pretty funny, too.
Folks, that's right. A lot of people forget I'm president, including me. But guess what? And by the way, I think I did a pretty good job. I passed more bills than any president in history. But folks, we still got work to do, no joke. I'm being serious right now. Come on. And guess what? And by the way, the fact of the matter is, the rich don't pay their fair share. They gotta pay the fair share. We gotta build back better. Build back the better, the better, the better. Build back the better. Can't believe it's not butter.
Oh, my gosh, so good. Guess what? And by the way, there you go, Saturday Night Live, and those are your clips. It's time to get to my guest. I hope that you don't mind that I did 35 minutes of news. It's the most comprehensive recap you can find. You can always skip ahead if you don't like it. Put a lot of work into it, and I am very, very grateful to those of you who pay for a subscription, because you also get the best part, guests like today's. Melinda Blau joining me. She's a New York Times bestselling author. I'm so excited to share this with you. It's something different. I want to do more interviews like this that are about life and finding happiness and relieving stress and anxiety. And one of the most important things you can do is have connections and create relationships with all kinds of different relationships. And that's why this book is so good. The Wisdom Whisperers, Golden Guides to a Long Life of Grit, Grace, and Laughter. She is the co-author of New York Times bestsellers, Secrets of the Baby Whisperer, and its two sequels, Family Whispering, the book that inspired her Huffington Post advice column. She's won multiple awards, commendations for her writing, has been interviewed numerous times, all the big shows. She's one of the hosts of the podcast Crow's Feet, Life as We Age, which is dedicated to changing the conversation about getting older. And she definitely did that for me. I was honest about my ageism. She called me out on it. This is a wonderful conversation with a wonderful woman who I hope to spark a friendship with. I'm very excited to share her work, this interview with you, this book with you. I hope that you'll get it and the rest of her work, and let her know that you heard her here on the show for the first time. The magical, the wonderful, the brilliant, the hilarious, very inspiring Melinda Blau. Welcome to Stand Up. There she is now, Melinda Blau, for the first time, the New York Times bestselling author. The new book is so impactful to me, and it will be to everybody who gets it, and everybody needs to get it because you are alive and you will grow older. The Wisdom Whisperers, Golden Guides to a Long Life of Grit, Grace, and Laughter. What a pleasure and an honor to get to talk to you. I am so impressed with your entire body of work, your career, and especially love this book. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here. It really is.
Let's just get to know you a little bit before we get into this book, if you don't mind. You have written several books that have been bestsellers, of course, The Baby Whisperer, which I think so many parents in America probably have on their bookshelf. I had that before I got connected to you. And it's all really important work. Tell me a little bit about your career as a journalist, as an author, a writer.
Well, pretty early on in my career, I focused on relationships because to me, that's everything. You know, I have 3 grandsons, 2 kids, 3 grandsons, and I tell them all the time, I said, you know, you could be great at sports, you could get all A's, you could be the star of the theater, but the one thing and they all have it, the one thing that you're really good at is social skills. And that's the thing that gets you through life. So I always say, I say it on my website, I say it a lot of times in my articles, if you're good at relationships, you're good at life. So many of my books and many articles have been about relationships, sometimes father-daughter relationships with parents, relationships with your kids. I did a very important book called Consequential Strangers, and that was about relationships outside of family and close friends. And those are really, really important relationships as well. And this book is also about relationships, but it's more about intergenerational relationships.
Consequential Strangers, the subtitle, turning everyday encounters into life-changing moments, talking about the barista, the mechanic, your coworker that populate our days, but we take them for granted. That's really an important book, an important idea, and it's certainly the idea that is in your new book about all these women that you befriended. But continue. Right. I interrupted you. I just wanted to give a little bit more.
No, that's okay. I'll interrupt you another time.
All right. Well, we're already getting along really, really well, Melinda, and I'm so excited.
No, Consequential Strangers, before this book, I've often said that was my most important book, because at the time that I wrote it, I had been connected to, I know lots of academics. That's how I do my research. And I had been connected to this woman, Karen Fingerman, and she called me at one point and she said, I want to write a book. Would you write it with me? And I said, well, what's the book? She said, I don't know. And she studied mother-daughter relationships. She studied a lot of things, family relationships. And she sent me a paper, and it was called Consequential Strangers Over the Life Cycle. And I read this paper, and I said, oh, my God, no one has written about this subject. And what she opened with her pulling up to her children's preschool or maybe middle school, and how all the parents knew each other, were very polite to each other. They would say, where's the best bakery in town? Where's your pediatrician? And so there was this friendly but not close exchange of information, ideas, perspectives. And she started realizing how important that was. And she gave them the name Consequential Strangers, which to write it over and over again in a book title is hard. I used to say, I'm never going to write such a long book title again.
That's funny.
But it's a great term. It's this oxymoronic term. You think, well, how could strangers be consequential? But, the continuum of relationships starts with strangers to soulmates. And on that continuum, most people are consequential strangers.
I love it. But why, just a little bit deeper on why relationships are so important, why you talk to young people about social skills and why they're so important. I have thoughts about it, but I want to know what's behind that. Why is it so important to have relationships with strangers, much less, as you write in your new book, with people who are older than you, or making new friends as you age? And as one of your friends said, because you have to replenish.
Exactly. That was Zelda. No, relationships really are everything, because you get information from relationships. Relationships also provide a mirror. You can tell a story to 5 different people, or write a book and 5 different people will read it. And they will see, if it's a 3-minute conversation or a whole book, they'll see what they see in it. And it's always different. I always say it's like a Rorschach test. So that you're bouncing yourself off other people. You're learning. You're getting a perspective that is different from. With the Consequential Strangers, one of the benefits is your loved ones and the people close to you, politically, entertainment-wise, they read the same books, they like the same things. Consequential Strangers come from all walks of life and can bring you awareness that you never had before.
So good, so important, and also just the community aspect of it, right? Just
absolutely.
I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are on loneliness at any age.
Well, no, loneliness actually was they were starting to talk about the loneliness epidemic.
Yeah.
When Consequential Strangers came out in 2009, and they're still talking about it.
Oh, yeah. It's real.
But the problem is that when they do the studies on loneliness, they don't ask about consequential strangers, because I know plenty of people that have never gotten married, never had kids, but they have a very rich social life. And it may include going to the deli every morning and schmoozing with the guy behind the counter who you've now known for 15 years.
Yep.
And
your mailman, the bus driver, your neighbor, who I try to get too close to my neighbors, but no, but absolutely.
No, and some, you're right. I mean, I have a chapter in that book called The Downside of Consequential Strangers. If you're stuck with a bad neighbor, you're stuck with that person.
Oh, yeah. So, and, I was for a long time over politics. It was a sign war. Well, she had her signs. I had none.
You mentioned Zelda, and I was writing Consequential Strangers when I was getting to know Zelda.
Mm-hmm.
And she was, at this point, probably 96 or 97. I met her playing tennis. She played tennis till 99.
Of course you did.
Right. And
we met bungee jumping.
No, I wouldn't be bungee jumping.
Go ahead, sorry.
But she picked me up on the tennis courts, and by complimenting me. She knew how to make consequential strangers.
Love it.
And she said to me, and she had this little gravelly voice, and she said, "Dear, you have such a nice stroke." Well, of course, she had me, right? But on top of that, she reached out her hand to me, and she had these bright blue eyes, and she looked right in my eyes, and she was irresistible.
How do you, one of my favorite things about this book, you're getting into it, The Wisdom Whispers, is that when we meet each one of these women in your life, you're such a great writer. You capture those moments. And I have no idea how a writer or journalist does this, but do you somehow take notes in your mind or during those moments, during those encounters, or write about it later? It's so hard to capture meeting somebody or chance encounters or consequential encounters, but you do it so well. And I wonder how you're able to capture it. And it's one of the great reasons I loved reading about these relationships.
Thank you. You know, when I sat down, I had talked about this book for a good 10 or 15 years before I actually wrote it. And I'm a journalist. So in my head, when I met each of these people, of course, everybody is a potential story. And I've always regretted that I don't take notes. I don't keep a journal. But these meetings, because they turned into such important relationships in my life, I kept them with me and I would tell people stories about them. So I would talk about meeting Zelda many times. So by the time I sat down to write the book, and I really didn't know how I was going to write it, because I knew I wasn't going to do biographies of these women.
Right.
What I set out to do was, if any biography, it was a biography of our relationship. How do you meet somebody and make friends with somebody who's 25 or 32 years older? And in doing that, the first thing had to be, well, how did I meet them? What happened to take the next step? So, for example, with the first one I met, when she invited me home to her house, I knew, because I'd been writing about relationships for years, that this is a next level. You know, everybody likes to say, take it to the next level. With friendship, it's like the slow peeling of an onion. And you take it to the next level as you know more about the person, you reveal a little bit more about yourself, they reveal a little bit more. So going to somebody's house or inviting them to your house is a much more intimate thing.
Absolutely. As soon as you walk in, especially for a cruelly judgmental person like myself, not proud of it, but it is a trait I have. I walk into your house, I look around, I'm in your space, even in your car. I mean,
everybody does.
And I decide everything about you. I've made up my mind. I don't know that everybody goes quite as far as I do. It's not a great quality, but it's inevitable, it would seem. Now, let me just start, let me just say something provocative to make our conversation that much more interesting. I have been called by many of my listeners who I like to think love and respect me the way I do them. I've gotten to know so many of them so well because I host a hangout every week since the pandemic, since lockdown. So it's been over 4 years. We really got to know people. And obviously I've hosted a show every day. So they hear me, they hear my idiosyncrasy, my weaknesses, my prejudices and stuff. I've been called an ageist more than a few times. And I want to talk to you about this, and I would like to continue to be defensive.
So I'm going to ask you an embarrassing question, but it's probably out there, and I should have looked it up. But how old are you?
I'm 80. So
no, you're not. You're copying me.
She's 80, and I mentioned that.
I'm 80, and I'm proud of it.
I'm 48, and So that's your question, but specifically,
no, and I will tell you why I asked. I did not know. And I didn't know the word ageism then. I had no clue about ageism until my early 60s when I was affected by it.
How were you affected by it?
Okay, well, I talk about this in the book. I talk about going on, I was on television a lot. I have not had any work done. I wear makeup, but that's where I draw the line. But I was on the television show and the producer came and it was a long spot. It was a piece on disappointment. They let me go on for 10 minutes, which is very rare on TV. And afterwards, the producer, who is a woman, and probably my age, maybe a little bit younger, I think I was 62. And she said to me, "You were great. You were terrific. We want to have you back again, but next time wear a turtleneck."
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Oh, wow is right. That was my first.
Well, I should say I had a similar experience just last week on CNN. They asked me to wear a full mask, which I thought was really hurtful. I'm kidding. But
well, in the pandemic, that was something that a lot of women liked during the pandemic. You couldn't see the wrinkles.
Right. Men too. Hey, listen, I'm bald and my best strength is my eyebrows. So me in a hat and a mask, I'm a 10. But Melinda, my ageism, you're talking about, and there is all kinds of ageism, and it's so problematic and devastating for people, especially around jobs and relationships and so much more. I think I tend to think or get labeled this because I talk about politics, and I'm one of these people who said, I think at a certain age, you shouldn't be in public office in such important roles like president or maybe even mayor. Would I make exceptions? Sure. But there are age limits for certain jobs like airline pilot and so on. You're talking, and so I try to be specific just about that. And I wonder where you come down on and think about, as America's been having this debate over first Joe Biden, obviously over Trump, but just in general, politicians, leaders, senators, much less presidents, 80, late 70s, am I ageist?
Yes. Because that's the short answer.
Thank you. My entire audience agrees with you.
That's the short answer. The longer answer is, first of all, a lot of ageism is subtle, very subtle. You don't even realize it when it's coming out of you. And just like all the other isms, there's internalized ageism. Now, I notice you have some gray in your beard.
How dare you?
And I can't see your body, but I'll bet you exercise and you're probably in good shape because your generation is great like that.
Yes, I'm in very good shape.
But here's the thing. Just like all 48-year-olds are not alike, all 80-year-olds are not alike. For sure. And in fact, the research shows there's more diversity among old people than younger because different things happen in their lives. Now, I'm very lucky. But I've always said, I'll give you an example where I was ageist. I have a friend out here who was a dancer her whole life. Then she started teaching yoga. She's now 85. And I said to somebody, she has the body of a 50-year-old. And I caught myself only because I write a lot about aging. I said, wow, that's really ageist of me. She has the body of an 85-year-old who has used, respected, and loved her body her whole life. I have the mind probably of a much younger person because I constantly use it. Not so much my body, but that's why you can't make blanket statements about 80-year-olds or how old somebody should be. I mean, I'm not prepared to come up with a list, but Kissinger comes to mind. He was a compass statesman into his 90s.
Yeah.
Well into his 90s. Fair. So it depends on the person.
Very well said. Yeah, no, I mean, talking to you and preparing to talk to you, knowing your age, you're the same age as my dad. And my dad and you, I think, are probably as sharp and cogent as you were 30 years ago. I mean, I listening to you talk and listening to interviews before, I'm like, oh, this person doesn't sound like some 80-year-olds, like President Joe Biden.
And by the way, your father doesn't either, because I was listening to some.
Oh, did you hear that?
Yes, I did it. I loved it. And I thought, and this was even ageist of me thing, I thought, wow, he sounds like a much younger man. That is exactly what I thought.
He's one of those people that his entire life tells stories. He comes home at the end of the day, tells you about the guy, and he's perfected it, and he hasn't missed a step, and he still has this great sense of humor. So,
and I'll bet it's even better. See, that's the thing. When people say to me, oh, you're such a good talker. I said, I've been practicing.
Yeah, no, you get better. You get better. Well, let me go back. You said when we were talking about, meeting people and the importance of relationships, and you talk about in your previous book and in this book to some extent how you met these women. But I think the more important question, not that that's not important, and you write all about this, which I find super helpful, even at my age, and I don't think gender matters to this book, is the why. Why would any of us befriend somebody that's 20 years older? You also talk about at age 80 now, your friendships range all the way up and all the way down. You decide who you want to plug in and why. So why is it important, though, for us certainly to have friends, good friends, who are older?
Well, I think it's important to do up and down the age ladder, but sure. The older they're ahead of us on the path. And we never know what's going to happen to us in life. I mean, I could walk out the door and fall off the boardwalk and hurt and break my leg, and that'll change my life. But I don't know what's going to happen. So with these older women, I often say they were like scouts ahead, looking at a territory that, if I'm lucky, that's the other thing. I view aging as a gift. I'm happy I'm still here. I'm happy I get to see what's happening in my grandsons' lives. I'm just happy I'm here. I like life. So until we cure mortality, there's going to be an end to my life. But I watch these women in their 90s and 100s literally living till the day they die, as opposed to your father is in good shape and he's got a good attitude. But you hear some people even younger than 80 that are saying, I'm 75, I don't need to buy new clothes. Or, I don't want to go out. I don't want to meet new people anymore. And that is not a good thing, because that's what keeps life interesting. Novelty. And I learned this from Consequential Strangers. Novelty, new experiences, openness, curiosity. That's the stuff of good life. And when you see older people doing it, it says, oh, if they can do it, I can do it. Now, at the other end of the continuum, where I have young people, I stay current. I get to see, like my oldest grandson's 21, and he was explaining TikTok to me, because I said, I don't want to go on TikTok. Don't want to be a TikTok grandma, because I look at that and some of them are being laughed at and not liked. And, it's just, and then he said to me, the thing is, even for young people, something is hot 1 minute and 3 months later, it's dead. Right. Or maybe even 2 months later. So I wouldn't have known that. And I asked them about the courses they're taking, their dating life. I want to know how things have changed. And that's my curiosity.
I like the way that you talk and write about how we, from the moment we're born, we start aging. And for a certain period of time, we think about what's next. And then at some point that changes. Tell me a little bit about how you've come to that conclusion, what you mean by that.
Well, I refer to them with a capital N, the nexts in our lives. And those are transitions, sometimes things that we want. A divorce is a next. A move to a new city is a next, or a new job. But when we're younger, we just look at that as, oh, that's part of life. Well, the next, as you get older, start becoming life-threatening. So if you fall, I start that chapter with a woman who at 98 had to give up her car. And she was very smart. She was driving one day, and for a second, it was a split second, she didn't know where she was. And she went home, and she said, you know what? Next time I won't be so lucky. And she decided to give up the car. She hated it because it impinged on her independence. And she says, I can't just go downtown and buy a lottery ticket.
Right.
Hop in the car.
Right.
But she got through it. And when you're young, you get through the good ones and the bad ones. You just keep moving ahead. But the trick is to keep moving ahead even as you get into your 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s, if you're lucky enough to live that long.
How do you not be concerned all the time about your health? How do you stay in the moment and actually live and not worry? You admit what some of your biggest anxieties are, losing your vision or having issues with your cognitive abilities, dementia, et cetera. So you're not saying it doesn't happen. You tell us a little bit about how you've learned to manage that and actually live and be and thrive as you do.
Well, one way I've learned to manage it, the vision thing, I was very, very nearsighted as a kid. And when I met my first old lady, aging was not I was 46. Aging was not on my radar. And I was as ageist as the next person. And they weren't even talking about it in the culture.
Right.
And I saw this woman, and she was legally blind. She walked with a cane, and she still was bopping around the city, taking the subway, Manhattan, taking the subway and living her life. And I thought, I need to understand how she does that. Where does she get the courage and the strength and the fortitude to go on? So that was what made me push past my own ageism. And when it happens to me today, a dear relative who I also talk about in the book, who did die without her cognitive abilities, it was one of the great tragedies of my life to watch her waste away. And yes, I have her genes. So it pops in my head. But then I think, you know what? Stay in the now. That's what I try to do. And that's what I also learned from my old ladies. They live each day as if it's their last. but they don't live it as if it's their last in a morbid way. It's, I'm here. Marge used to say, I'm conscious, upright, and breathing. And that was it. So when that kind of stuff comes in my head, I think of them. I think they could do it. I could do it.
I love it. I love talking to you. I love reading this book. Can I just throw some of the names and you can just say a little bit about what you learned? Because it's hard to do an interview about this book knowing that I want to cover it all, which is why everybody just needs to buy it, read it, and get familiar with all these ladies that Melinda introduces us to. And I'll get a little bit more specific. But tell me first about, if you don't mind, Henrietta.
Okay. Well, Henrietta was the one I just described that was legally blind and walked with a cane. And she was also the one who we met in a writing class. And that was a good thing because in a writing class, in fact, I walked into the room that day. Talk about ageism. I walked into the room because I was a freelancer when I was 46. So I could have signed up for the evening session or the afternoon. And it was right near my house. I said, I'm going to go in the afternoon. I walked into the room, and in my head, of course, not out loud, I said, a room full of old people. So I was not happy to be there. And when I watched this woman, and when she held her stuff up to read, it was like this. And she held it practically touched her nose. And her stories were wonderful. She wrote fiction. I don't write fiction. I never did after that class. That was a fiction class. I decided I'd try it. I didn't like it. And so I got to know her. She invited me home. She showed me how she managed because she had such low vision. She had big labels on everything in the kitchen. So she showed me her secrets. And then I moved out of the city and we became pen pals. So Henrietta has a lot of real estate in the book because when we became pen pals, we shared things. Now I'm in my 50s that I never thought I would share with an 80, 90-year-old woman. And it was because it was on paper. And there was a long time from one answer to the next. And so she really gave me great perspective. She was an amazing woman. She was actually my mother's age, but my mother died at 63. So I never got to see my mother old.
Tell us about... I'm sorry. I just want to move on to. I want to try to get to a few of the women that you introduced us to. Tell us about Anne. You've spent a lot of time in France, specifically in Paris, because your partner had a very important job there. And so Anne is French. She's the only psychoanalyst in the group of women that you mentioned. She's a Shoah survivor, and she challenged a lot of your ideas and beliefs, which is always hard in any age, but certainly probably harder as we age because we get more grounded in our values and our beliefs. I think it's fair to say.
Right. Anne is my most recent act. Well, I'll use Zelda's word. My most recent conquest. That's what Zelda used to call it. And I met her because I'm on Fire Island right now. And I was in a real estate office. And the real estate agent said, you two should know each other. And it was a male friend of Anne's. And she said, you two should know each other because you both spent time in Paris. And then I started talking about my old ladies. I hadn't even started the book yet. This was about 3 years ago. And they said, oh, you must meet Anne. And Anne is delightful. And why it's important that she's the only psychoanalyst. She's also the only one. If you think about that generation, they're all of the GI generation. It was not a navel-gazing group. You know, they didn't have not everybody went into therapy. Very few people.
Right.
In fact, Henrietta once said to me, the only person I know who saw a psychiatrist when I was growing up was a young woman who ran down the street naked one night. Then she needed a psychiatrist. So to meet Anne, who is now 96, and she was just finishing her memoirs about going through Shoah, and she actually was not in a camp, but her family was hiding from the Nazis. It's so wonderful because she has a very different mind than the other old ladies. And sometimes when I was writing something, not necessarily about one of the old ladies, because I write about issues as well. And so when I was writing the chapter on purpose, I was using the expression, as long as you're, we always say alive and well. I changed it to alive and doing. And she said to me, you can use that, but don't use it too much, she said, because there's plenty of people that are 90 and they can't do anything anymore, but they're still alive and they're still reading and they're still using their minds. They're still looking at the sunsets and the sunrises. And it was an incredible perspective that I didn't get because I'm 80 and I still can be alive and doing. But at 100, I might not be. And I didn't, this is why I say they were guides to a territory I didn't know.
You mentioned purpose. There's a chapter on purpose, and I can't say that one piece or passage or chapter is more important than any other, but this is an important element of life and having purpose, and we tend to lose it as we get older. I've talked openly about losing the purpose that I had, which was day to day, as your kids are younger, hour to hour, of being a father and the role model and being so connected to my daughters. But, unfortunately, they grew up to be exactly how we had planned, independent and confident.
Fortunately.
I joke, because no longer do they need me. So what is my purpose? And if you're not aware of how your purpose is going to evolve, and I haven't been, and how it can change, then you can end up stuck and sad and lonely and depressed with it. But you talk about how each of my old ladies, you write, in her own way, shines a light on the importance of purpose, or as Marge puts it, something to get me out of bed in the morning. And a psychoanalyst calls it the thing that gives one's life meaning. The thing changes over time. And that is so key to me, and why I use the example I gave. It changes over time, but that's hard. It's hard to change, to evolve and to adapt and have your purpose adapt. I'm so used to being this or doing that. And now I've got this new stark reality, and what the hell am I? Who am I?
Right. And that's why everybody makes a big deal about the empty nest syndrome. And especially, by the way, your generation of parents, and I wrote about this in Family Whispering, you and the collective you, are so child-focused, more than any generation of parents. You know the very, very fine details of your children's life, which I have to say, and sometimes my kids tease me about this, I didn't know the details of the life the way they know their children. And I'm not sure it's good. For one reason, it's difficult to let go. This is why you find people on college campuses, the administrators, they're saying these kids are walking across campus talking to their parents several times a day. And the parents are helping them with papers where they're in college. And God forbid, I've heard a story where someone actually called a prospective first boss on their child's.
It's a nightmare, and you're talking about what I have this conversation a lot. I think my generation of parents have become helicopter parents, is the term, and I think it's a terrible, terrible outcome for the child, because the child then becomes afraid of everything, and then, as you say, dependent on the parent, as opposed to free range parents, what I'm trying to be. But still, the point remains. And when my daughter first went to camp, which was like 2 or 3 weeks, it was the first 2 weeks I was going to be away from her. Melinda, I cried like a child. I cried that I missed her. So the issue, you're pointing out the consequences of our parenting on the kids, and I'm talking about the consequences of me being so close and knowing the granularity of our children's lives. The way you say it's hard to let go, and you make that point. But getting back to the point about purpose, how have you, written specifically, thought about that as you have adapted? Because you have adapted and aged and evolved in your career and your life, so it looks from the outside perfectly.
Well, it's never perfect.
I know, but it looks that way.
But no, I have been able to. Some of it I go kicking and screaming, like with a lot of the technologies. Like, I don't want to learn it.
Right.
TikTok is where everybody draws a line in the sand. And I watch this with my old ladies. A couple of them are very technologically savvy. I was sitting with my 2 French old ladies, Anne, who's 96, and Lois, who's 93. Lois is an American, but she's been in France for 60 years. And all of a sudden, Anne's phone rings, and it's on her. She's got an Apple Watch.
Oh, right.
And I look at her and I go, you have an Apple Watch? My kids wanted to get me an Apple Watch for my 80th birthday. I said, no, I don't need one. I don't want to learn anything more. So when this happened after that, and I said, you haven't, she says, I love it. I said, do you get it? She said, I get as much as I need to get of it, which was a really smart answer. So I've told my kids, if I make it to 90, they can get it for my 90th birthday, because a lot of old people are wearing them now because they have fall detectors. And the old joke, I've fallen and I can't get up. And
That was
they don't put them on. You can't take them in the shower. So an Apple Watch is a safer thing. But I think I've pivoted because I'm curious and because I want to be in the game. And that's it. I mean, I remember when I started doing podcasting with Crow's Feet, and they asked me to join them, and because I had written a lot, and as I think I may have started telling you this, one of the reasons that it was difficult for me was I had to learn a lot of new technology. I had to buy a microphone. I had to do this, and it took a while. And I listened to my first one and I go, oh God, I was terrible.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I prided myself on as a journalist was that I didn't do interviews. I had conversations.
Right.
So I thought this will translate really well. Well, it's fine when you have a tape recorder going and you just need the words. It's not so much when you're actually trying.
Yeah, it's a whole different beast. But you've done such a great job at that as well. I'm loving this conversation. That's for sure. My
friend told me I pivot. That's the new word. I pivot.
Yeah, it is a new word, but it's it's good. It's a good way to keep the conversation obviously interesting. So I always pivot. When I pivot, I try to have a segue, and I realize that people actually they don't care. Just pivot. It doesn't matter if you have a segue. Like I was just trying to force in right now with you, but let me ask you simply here at the end, and I hope that you can be my friend and mentor, and we can keep talking and taping these conversations because your wisdom is endless and boundless, and clearly you're not even remotely done gaining that wisdom. So maybe share a nugget or two that you learned and shared in the book from one of these amazing women that you befriended.
Well, I get at this at the very end of the book. I learned everything about life from these women. But one of the things that has been surprising to me, both when I was writing the book and especially after, I had a friend say to me, well, do you consider yourself an old lady? So I said, yeah, I am. I said, when you're 80, you can't say you're young anymore. But I said that when I was 70, and it's the same reason. But what has really surprised me was how good it feels to have somebody look at you and say, you give me hope about aging. That is it's an amazing feeling in the moment, but then it also makes you, it's aspirational in a way because you say, I want to keep this up. I like this feeling. So even though I hate exercising, I better make sure I do it. I got to keep myself in good shape. Got to keep my mind sharp. And that's what these women taught me, was that there's just always something new, always another horizon, as long as you're conscious, upright, and breathing, as Marge said. And I love when she used to say that.
Do you have any kind of daily practice, Melinda, that you do, something that you do every day that keeps you, I don't know which adjective I want to use, any kind of daily practice at all that you... I mean, like calm or...
I'm going to hate myself for saying this. The only daily practice I have is words with friends.
Words with friends.
I love word games, and I love words, and I find it's very relaxing to me. So I rationalize that I'm not wasting time. I'm keeping my mind sharp. But I also walk a lot. I have a dog, and that helps. And I just talk to everybody. That's probably my most important practice, is that if I see someone that's interesting on the street, and I started this after Consequential Strangers, and it's been so rewarding that I've done more and more of it. I might say, I like your sneakers. It has to be genuine. Just something, or where do you get your hair cut, or something like that. And the conversation may go no further, or it may lead to something that goes on, and consequential strangers sometimes become friends.
My mom has been that person her whole life. And she goes out to lunch with people she met at a traffic light or in line at the grocery store. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I once scolded her for it. I'm so ashamed.
Oh, don't.
We were walking on the path near my house, and she kept saying hi to everybody that was walking by. And I said, first of all, we're having this deep talk, and you keep interrupting it by saying hi to people. And second of all, this is New York. Nobody just says hi as they walk by. It's not like upstate. And she scolded me because that is who I am. And I just was like, okay, sorry, I'm such a jerk.
One of my great regrets, and this is because I was too young to realize this, when I wrote Consequential Strangers, we did not have a chapter on aging. And when I went out on the road and I started giving talks about it, invariably somebody would say exactly what you said. My mother does this all the time, and I would always say, and I'll bet your mother's in great shape. And they'd go, how did you know that? Again, what's that come back down? Social. That's the stuff of life.
Oh yeah, my mom.
Really is.
My mom is the mayor of the neighborhood. She just and she had a party for everybody in the neighborhood. My parents are now the elders on the street where they once were the youngest, where I grew up, and all these young people my age really that were at this kind of block party my mom hosted at their house. They all came up to me and said, "Your mother this, your mother that." She talked to me. I met her and it's exactly as you say, and she is exactly as you describe. As are you, Melinda. What an honor and a pleasure. Can we please continue this conversation?
Absolutely, I would love to. You're a terrific interviewer, and I love being on the show. So anytime you want.
Everybody will benefit from all of your work, but especially your new book, The Wisdom Whispers. Go buy it right now. Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you.
Yeah, how about it? Melinda Blau, what did you think? The Wisdom Whispers, golden guides to a long life of grit, grace, and laughter. I love that. That conversation really moved me, and I'm very excited to talk to Melinda again in the future. Thank you so much to my old intern, Odessa Son, who is awesome and kept in touch with me and always reaches out with great ideas for guests. That's her aunt. That's Odessa's aunt, Melinda. And so it's pretty cool connection. I'm very, very happy to have made and to have had on. Well, that's it. That's all I've got for you on today's show. Looking forward to sharing my conversation tomorrow with Ryan Hampton, who's the author of Fentanyl Nation, Toxic Politics and America's Failed War on Drugs, another very important book. And this guy is absolutely brilliant. His work is so, so important. You're going to love that. But that's it. That's all I've got for you today. I see you tomorrow. And as well as the VP debate watch party. Hope to see you there. Tell your friends. Join us. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I will talk to you then. Bye, my bumblebees. John Carroll taking us out as he does every day. JohnCarroll.org. Take it away, brother.
That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up. Stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for loss, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change would begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and